This is the One Soldier Podcast, Episode 10, The Rhodesian Bush War. In this episode, I'm joined by Tim Bax. He's the best-selling author of the book 3 Sips of Gin and a veteran of Rhodesia's Bush War. During our chat today, Tim shares his experience fighting terrorists as a soldier of the famed Rhodesian Light Infantry and the Selous Scouts. On today's podcast, I caught up with Tim from his home in Orlando. Here's our conversation.
I understand you've got a bit of snow up there.
Oh man, you know what? I was, a couple days ago, I was still shoveling my driveway. So yeah, I'm actually pretty jealous that you're in Orlando right now.
It's pretty hot here, Russell. You'd have to be indoors, I promise you.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's nothing like your experience in Rhodesia though.
Well, it's a different kind of heat. It's very humid here. It's very dry in Rhodesia.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, so you ready for this?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Tim Bax, welcome to the podcast. I am really, really excited to have you on the show today.
And I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So I've been reading your book, 3 Sips of Gin, and I like it. I mean, it's really good, man. It's a great book. And it resonates with, I think, me and anybody who wants to get that sense of adventure and maybe even like remember what it feels like to sort of strike out on your own for the first time and challenge yourself and test yourself, because that's exactly what you did in this book.
Well, unfortunately, Russell, that book, it was originally published as a humorous memoir of my life. And the tragic thing is, as soon as you release a book to a publisher, a formal publisher, they can pretty much do with it what they want. And they started marketing it as more of a war book than a humorous expose of my life. And that's where it all started to unravel a little bit. But yeah, what I wanted to do, and it's really hard to write a humorous book when you're dealing with things that happened to your buddies in the army, where they might have been badly wounded or died, and you got to be very careful not to make light of something like that. But I found that anything that happens in your life, as tragic or as bad as it might have been at the time, looking back, you can always find a little bit of humor in it. And it's one way that people like me, can just get through what has happened to them in their past.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. And, in reading your book, the humor definitely comes out in many, there's so many examples and events in the book where you do find the humor. And I was actually like laughing at when I was reading this book in some parts, like the time when your sergeant, when you're in the reserves of Canada, goes off and it gets lost while he's taking a dump in the woods. And then you're like, the guy asks you, what was the last thing you heard? And you're like, a fart. It's just, no, but yeah, like you do, it's some pretty heavy stuff. And I think, that makes a lot of sense. You got to try to find some humor in it. And if not, you're going to go crazy. Yeah.
I initially self-published the book, and I know that your brother has written the book, right? Dylan.
Yeah. We co-authored the book, One Soldier.
Did you self-publish or did you go to a publisher?
No, we got really lucky, actually. The story behind that is, so we got picked up by HarperCollins within like 24 hours. And so we got incredibly lucky. I was talking to my brother Dylan when he got back from fighting against the Islamic State. As the months went on, he would sort of open up a little bit here and there about, his experience over in Iraq helping out the Kurds. And then like as the pieces started to fall into place, I got into my mind that like, hey, this is like an incredible story that people are going to want to know about. And so I asked Dylan, I said, do you want to write a book and I'll help you? Because, he's more of a soldier than he is a writer. So I thought I could help him out with that. And his response to me was like, it's a fucking stupid idea. Like nobody's going to want to read about this. And I was like, no, man, like, trust me, this is a good story. We should get it out there. And so we wrote up a few sample chapters and then found an agent. And then within like 48 hours, I think we were signed on with HarperCollins.
That's very good. Now, Russell, is he still in the army?
He's not. He's so he got out. He was in Afghanistan, I think in 2013, and then he got out of the army shortly after that.
Okay.
And so while he was a civilian, he went over to Iraq to volunteer with the Kurds.
Okay.
And so no, he's right now he's like doing investment banking in Toronto on Bay Street. So
okay. Yeah.
he pursued like a totally different career after that.
Okay. The one thing that writing that book, Three Sips of Gin, did for me was that it put my name out there, and it got me involved with the United States and the Canadian, I might add, special operations communities. They just wanted to reach out to me and find out, whether there might be any lessons learned today from what we did in the past. And arising out of that, I wrote another book, which was a more serious book, whereas the first book, Three Sips of Gin, was a humorous expose of my life. And I really just wanted to show that you can always find humor in anything that happens to you. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a way of coping with the after effects of bad things or traumatic things which might have happened. And so then I wrote this book called Who Will Teach the Wisdom? And that's more a military book, which is done really well. And in it, I just go into the sort of various wars that have been fought in the past and where we just lack wisdom in fighting those wars. And how tragic it is that we have, as we have progressed with unconventional warfare, we have tended to conventionalize unconventional warfare.
So that's fascinating. So you basically got headhunted by the military community to sort of expand upon.
It happened in a very slow way. I'm good friends with a doctor in America here who I actually met in Rhodesia. He's an American doctor. He's a virologist, in fact. And in fact, right now he's on the White House task force on this coronavirus thing. Anyway, if you cast your mind back, you're a young guy, Russell. You might not remember this, but in 2002 in the States, there was a big nonsense about someone posting anthrax through the mail,
right,
to Washington, and I think about 5 people got killed with anthrax. And my friend Steve got into a lot of. He was actually accused by the FBI of being the person of interest in that whole fiasco.
No way.
Yeah, and then about 2 or 3 years later, he was vindicated and he let off the hook, and the FBI had to, make amends in quite a big way. So he and I opened up a jungle training camp in Puerto Rico. And so so we had already opened up a training camp in Puerto Rico. I had written this book, Three Sips of Gin. It got a bit of interest from the American Special Operations Committee and Canadian JTF2 people. And so we did a lot of training with the guys in Puerto Rico. Wow. And what they wanted me to do was teach them some of the tactics that we had used in Rhodesia to see if any of them could be utilized today.
So you're working with the special ops forces for Canada and America in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, we had a jungle training camp there, basically teaching them jungle tactics, and we had a lot of fun down there. Yeah,
I bet. What kind of things can be? What are some of the lessons that you learned fighting the Bush War in Rhodesia that can still be applicable to fighting terrorists today? Because, of course, I'd imagine the environment is a little bit different.
Oh, it is completely different, but there are some lessons. The first lesson is that we have conventionalized unconventional warfare. We send. When I talk about unconventional warfare, I'm talking about a battle space. I'm not talking about a battlefield where large brigades, armored brigades, bludgeon themselves to death on a large battlefield. I am talking about, small battle spaces, whether it be in Iraq, Afghanistan, or Africa, or wherever. And we send in guys to quell insurgencies there, and they are so unprepared for that in terms of so many things. A soldier is equipped with extraordinary power. I mean, life and death are in his hand, but his authority is very limited. So, a soldier's authority is vested in the next highest rank above him. A formation's authority is vested in the next highest formation, which ultimately is vested in an army headquarters somewhere, and in the democratic society, ultimate authority is vested in the civilian government. So what does that all mean? It means that some guy in a government is making decisions to send one poor guy into battle space, and he is not equipped to do that. You can't send a soldier who's maybe trained in Sandhurst or West Point or whatever military academy that he might have been trained, and send him into a battle space in Afghanistan and deal with an insurgent, because he's just not prepared for that. And the problem also is, the second problem is that, we teach soldiers what to think. We don't teach them how to think. Insurgencies are moving the whole time. The tactics change every day. And so if you're fighting an insurgency, you need to change your tactics every day. And unfortunately, our soldiers can't do that, because they're told to go into an area, they're told how to fight, they're told what they can do and what they can't do. And so it's just an unfair battle. So in Rhodesia, there's this old mantra that a snake can disguise itself from many things, but it can't disguise itself from another snake. So you don't send a hyena to find a snake, you send a snake to find a snake. So we started this, and the other trouble with insurgencies are that the difficulty is finding the insurgents.
Right.
Once you find them, you can bring your weapons platforms to bear, and you can kill the enemy.
Well, this goes back to I think you're experiencing in the Scouts, right, of Rhodesia, because I mean everything you're talking about now is when you say a modern soldier is in some ways ill-equipped. Well, like, are you getting at the fact that they can't really fit into the culture, and they don't know like the society that they're sort of like being inserted into?
Yeah. There are so many aspects to this, Russell. First of all, you can't send a Canadian or an American or someone in to fight a war anywhere else, because they're just gonna annoy the population. They are not wanted guests there; they are unwanted guests. So that's the first problem that someone has when any soldier goes in when they go into a battle space. And so they've got to go in. The best way to fight evil is with evil, and a lot of people don't want to hear that. And especially in the American special operations community, because they're very politically correct, and as I presume they are in Canada as well.
Oh, for sure.
In terms of what you can do and what you can't do, because today you've got reporters embedded with you. Everything you do is going to be reported back, and it makes it very difficult for young guys to operate. But they've got to operate as the enemy. If you want to find a snake, you disguise yourself as a snake and you go and kill that snake.
Yeah, and of course that brings up all the, as the soldiers today are put under a microscope.
Absolutely.
We did a podcast with a guy named Captain Robert Semrau, who was a Canadian captain in Afghanistan, and he was, it's sort of what you're talking about. He was leading a small team, ostensibly to train the Afghan National Army. And I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but he was charged with murder because he apparently killed a wounded Taliban on the battlefield. And that might be an extreme case, but I mean, there's also the microscope is on like, how do you treat prisoners? Like, are you, there was, I know at the time, a lot of political problems because we were handing prisoners over to the Americans in Afghanistan. And I think what you're saying is, if you're going to fight an insurgency, then you better take the gloves off.
You've got to take the gloves off, and you've got to give young soldiers who we send to fight that insurgency the ability to make quick decisions, because the insurgents are changing their tactics every day. If they feel that the government forces are getting the upper hand, they'll change their tactics, and we need to have the flexibility to change our tactics too. So the authority to change that tactic must be vested in young non-commissioned officers. We must equip young non-commissioned officers at the lowest level with the ability to adapt and to change as he sees the battlefield or the battle space changing. And he cannot be held to conventional tactics that were taught to him when he went over to that battle space initially. He needs to be able to say to himself, I need to adapt, because if I don't adapt, I'm going to get blown up by an IED, or I'm going to get ambushed, or I'm going to do something. So, the soldiers that we field, Canadian, American, British, whatever, are the most intelligent soldiers that have ever been fielded in the history of warfare. They are really clever guys. I mean, you speak to the average American special operations guy, he speaks 2 or 3 languages fluently. He's a university graduate. And so they're clever. They have the ability to think, but they're not given the latitude to think. So
they sort of need that autonomy in the field.
Yeah, they need more autonomy in the field. They need to be able to make decisions and adapt. Where the enemy adapts, they need to be able to adapt. And they don't need to go back to a headquarters to get permission to adapt and wait for that to happen, because they'll get killed in the meantime. There are too many graves and too many foreign lands of Canadians and Americans and British who were too slow to learn, and it's a great pity. So that's why I wrote that book, Who Will Teach the Wisdom? And it's
well, it sounds like I can't wait to read it. Like I said, I love 3 sips of gin, and so Who Will Teach the Wisdom is going to be on my list. You mentioned an interesting thing though about how soldiers in the modern era, when we go into Afghanistan or Iraq or any country, we're not wanted. And I think that's a really interesting point because, first of all, I think it's correct, but we don't really realize that. And in fact, if you think back to the Iraq invasion, and Afghanistan as well, the mantra was that we're bringing freedom to these countries. And so, of course, Iraqis and Afghanistan people are going to want us coming in there because we're bringing freedom. But that's not actually the case, is it?
No.
Like in many cases, our notion of freedom is completely different and alien to theirs.
Absolutely. And, our culture is so different. You cannot, Russell, you cannot send a Sandhurst or a West Point or whatever trained officer to Afghanistan and to expect him to understand the mindset of some mongrel of terror living in the shadows in Afghanistan. That's like saying to an astronaut, if they perchance meet some alien, they're not going to know how to react or get on with this alien. So before you send, and we're unwanted. The people just don't want us. We are an unwanted guest. And we were training a special forces group a couple of years ago. They had to go to Kenya, and there was a warlord in Kenya. And so we were training the small operations group of Kenya at our general camp in Puerto Rico on how we thought they should do this. And I was struck by how cocksure the young soldiers were. They said to us, we don't really need your training. We can, we're pretty self-sufficient. We can back ourselves to go and handle any situation. And I said, well, how are you going to find the warlord? And they said, we're pretty covert when we need to be. And I said, you know what? That's your first mistake. If you go first of all, if you go into an area and you're looking for guys who've been living in that area all their lives, and you think that you're going to, as white people, you're going to walk around that area and they're not going to know you're there, you're delusional. It ain't going to happen. So it doesn't matter how well trained you think you are, it just simply isn't going to happen.
How would you have found that warlord or found that terrorist gang in the jungle of Mozambique or the bush of Rhodesia when you were with the Rhodesian Light Infantry or the Selous Scouts?
Well, the Selous Scouts would have found him because we would disguise ourselves as other warlords. So, as I say, it takes a snake to find a snake. So if we wanted to find a terrorist group in Rhodesia, we would disguise ourselves as a terrorist group. But it's not quite as easy as it sounds. You've got to learn. I mean, the selection course and what they call the dark phase. We each have to go through what's called a dark phase, where you actually, it's like your brother. He would have to go through training, and he would have to completely forget that he was a Canadian officer. He'd have to erase that fact from his mind, and he would have to forget how to salute. He would have to forget all the discipline he'd ever been taught, and he would have to learn how to be a Taliban or whatever group that he was fighting, or a warlord in Kenya. And he would have to learn how they acted. He would have to learn how they speak. He would have to learn everything, and it would take him a good 6 or 7 months to do that. And so it's a complete conversion for any regular soldier, even being a special operations guy who wants to go in a pseudo operation and act as an enemy, because then what happens is you are now a warlord, and the other warlords actually come and try and find you, and that's how you find them. But the other problem, Russell, is, and you touched on it earlier, is the Canadian soldier or the American soldier mustn't be killing people in Afghanistan and wherever they're operating, because it's all very well to go and kill a warlord. You can send a Canadian combat team in Kenya, they'll kill the warlord. That's fine, they've killed the warlord. But everyone's going to be incensed about that. And so in his place, another 6 warlords will rise out of the ashes, because people are incensed that Canadians came and killed the Kenyan. So you just cannot have that. You can go and train the Kenyans to do the killing. And this is where we must be very, very careful with our counterinsurgency operations.
Well, yeah, and it all comes back to politics, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is that how you would have approached things in the Rhodesian Bush War, with the mindset that, like, we don't need to just kill the leader, but we've got to eradicate the it's like a many-headed hydra, sort of.
Well, the thing is, Russell, I've studied a lot of insurgencies. I've fought in a few myself, and I've studied a lot, and I've been downright amazed at how ineffectual they've been. And the big problem in an insurgency is as I say, finding the enemy. And being unconventional. I'll give you an example. In Kenya, back to Kenya. In Kenya, in about 1965, I think, there was a huge uprising. Kenya had a lot of British people, British farmers there.
And this was the Mau Mau.
This is the Mau Mau. And the British sent battalions and battalions and battalions of people to fight the Mau Mau. And it's like any insurgency war. If you look at any insurgency war, from Malaysia to Vietnam to wherever, who has won that war? Who has been the winner in that war? Is it the side with the best trained soldiers? Is it the side with the best weapons? Is it the side with the best technology? Is it the side with the best logistics? No, it's the side that fights with the greatest wisdom. And this is where we in Western armies are full short. We don't fight with a whole lot of wisdom. So in Kenya, the British, there was only a handful of Mau Mau. There could only have been about maybe 30 or 40 of them at the most. And the British sent battalions to try and find these Mau Mau. And after months and months of flogging around the jungle, the Aberdare Mountains, they hadn't found one Mau Mau. And there was one Kenyan policeman who had lived in Kenya all his life, a guy called Henderson. And I'm wrong, they did capture one Mau Mau. And Henderson said, give me that Mau Mau that you captured, and I will turn this whole war around. And with no help from you guys. So he took this Mau Mau, and how Henderson went back into the Aberdare Mountains with this Mau Mau, they turned him, and how he then connected with more Mau Mau, and then he ambushed them, and he either killed them or captured them. Eventually, the Mau Mau were so petrified, it's called terrorizing the terrorists. They didn't know who was a real Mau Mau group and who wasn't a real Mau Mau group. They were too afraid to link up with anyone, so they linked up with no one. And so the whole fabric of the Mau Mau insurgency fell apart because they were being terrorized. The terrorists were being terrorized, and they didn't know who was real. And that was the same in Rhodesia. The Rhodesian terrorist insurgents didn't know who were real insurgents and who were the Selous scouts, and they were petrified of us.
Yeah, so you were able to infiltrate their organization and just like sow the doubt and make a lack of trust within their own organization.
That's what you must do. And Colonel Rhodesian, who was the commanding officer of the Selous Scouts, he was a great guy, very innovative officer. He said to me one day, he said, the enemy must never know in what guise we're going to arrive to attack him next. We must be, to be unpredictable is not enough. We must be completely different in everything we must do. And they must never know whether we're going to come as soldiers or pseudo gangs or civilians. They must never know how we're going to attack them. We must always be doing something different. And this is where I go back to giving soldiers on the ground the autonomy to change their tactics. The thing is, but they're not given that autonomy. And the insurgents are. So it's a one-sided battle, and that's the problem.
One thing I was wondering, but while reading the book is, first of all, when you talk about disguising yourself as a terrorist gang, I mean, that to me was fascinating because, let's be honest, you're white guys. Yeah. Not an easy thing to pull off that disguise. But then also you've got people working with you who were terrorists a few months, years before. How could you be certain that you had turned them? Like, were you worried that they were going to sort of stab you in the back?
Sure. There are ways and means of avoiding that. If, for instance, if you caught if an insurgent was recently caught and captured, we would want to turn him straight away because we would want to put him right back into that battle space because that insurgent was known by the locals as being an insurgent. So he was known, recognized as being a real insurgent. So if we captured him, we wanted to put him right back in the field that same day with one of our pseudo groups. And so to answer your question, how do you ensure that he's not going to retaliate and shoot us? There's all kinds of ways of handling that. We would take the firing pin out of his AK. We'd give him an AK. We'd say, hey, we trust you. Here's an AK. You're one of us now. But we would have taken the firing pin out or
right.
Make it so the firing pin could work, something like that. So, you've got to protect yourself. But we had very few of those situations where they turned because they knew that if they returned back to their gang, if we had captured somebody and we were using them in a pseudo group, and they abandoned our pseudo group, went back to their gang wouldn't accept them. They would kill them.
Yeah,
because they would think that they were a double agent or something. So that was another reason why there were all kinds of reasons of ensuring that they would stay loyal to you. It's not an easy thing to do.
And no guarantees either. So I think, like I would imagine that, you can sort of double cross once, but you can't do it twice.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that that just being deep in the jungle or the bush with a small group of guys would be in some ways just terrifying. more so than if you're, fighting alongside like a company of men or a larger force, because you're so exposed out there and you're in hostile territory where I would assume a lot of the villages and the people there were probably sympathetic to ZANLA and FRELIMO.
They are. Of course, and that's the other problem. There are so many issues, Russell, fighting an insurgency. I mean, they just we're at such a disadvantage as an external force going into a country like Afghanistan, because first of all, the local population knows that we're not going to be there forever. The insurgents are going to be there forever. So where do you think their support's going to be?
Right.
We think that we can subdue them with our massive weapons platforms and firepower. We can't. Any village anywhere, any villager anywhere, whether he's in Afghanistan or Iraq or Rhodesia or wherever, is more afraid of having his throat slit by a machete than he is of a bomb dropping from the air, because he doesn't understand what a bomb is. He doesn't understand missiles. He doesn't understand anything. But he understands a cold piece of steel at his throat. So he's more terrified of a machete than of our multi-million-dollar weapons platforms that we use to try and subdue him. So there's all kinds of issues that are at play there. So
I wonder though if I wonder like how much of this, when you look back on your experience in Rhodesia, like how much of the outcome was inevitable? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, was the tide of history just going in one direction and the fall of Rhodesia was inevitable? Or if the scouts had been able to prosecute the war in the way that someone like Reed Daly wanted, could the outcome have been different? Like, if some things had to change like a little bit different, could the outcome have changed as well?
I don't think the outcome could have changed, really. I mean, the argument is that we were defeated not on the battlefield, but politically. We just we ran out of weapons, we ran out of bullets, we ran out of gasoline, we ran out of everything because of sanctions. So we were being forced to negotiate.
Because there's a point in the book where your commander, he wants to blow up a bridge in Mozambique or send in some fighter aircraft to get the job done. And then there's a discussion around the cabinet table and all these like political considerations come into play.
Yeah. It's, you can't find a war you can't fight a war in isolation. There's always got to be a political aspect to it. And if you think that you can fight a war in isolation, you're doomed right from the very beginning. It's got to be a dual approach, a political approach and a military approach, and you can't do the one without the other. And that's, I think, where we made our big mistake. And the mistakes have been made all over the world.
It sort of seemed like there was like the dominoes started falling when the Portuguese, at least from reading the book, it seemed that when the Portuguese got out of Mozambique, then that's when things really started to sort of go sideways, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I'm amazed at your grasp of that history. Yeah, whilst the Portuguese were still in Mozambique, the Portuguese army, although they weren't very effective, they were a presence on the ground, and so when they left, it expanded our hostile border by about 70%. We just didn't have the manpower to do it. And so we had to be completely innovative all the time. And that's why we were so successful as Rhodesian soldiers fighting the insurgents. So although we lost the war, yes, we did, but we never lost the battle. And it's because we kept adapting and changing and
yeah, it's almost like you hear that phrase so often, right? Like the army that wins all the battles and then still loses the war. I mean, Rhodesia is a perfect case of that. Yeah. But like, and I think of, in North America, I think a lot of us are way more familiar with the Vietnam War, which was fought at the same time period. And once again, it's the same thing where the Americans could be relied upon to win all the battles and all the firefights, but they still lost the war. There's a lot of similarities there. I was kind of wondering also, like in the book, you refer to the terrorists as gooks, and of course, anyone who's watched a Vietnam film like knows that term. So, like, actually this is a question for my brother. He was wondering if that term was because of all the Vietnam vets who came to Rhodesia to help out.
You tell your brother that I was in Fort Bragg about 2 years ago, and we were doing a presentation to the Green Berets. It was a 4-day presentation, and the reason for the presentation is that we were explaining to them how we would have done. They were going on a mission, and we were telling them how we would have done the mission. And I said to the guys, the American Special Operations guys, you just sit back and relax, and I'm going to take you on a tour of what we would have done. Because if you scratch around old graveyards long enough, you're going to find something that might just benefit you. And I used the terminology gooks quite a lot. And halfway through my presentation, I was stopped and I was actually chastised by one of the Americans. They said that you're not allowed to use that expression anymore. That is infiltrating. You must stop using that expression. I said, why? That's what we called them. Because you guys call them that. So to answer your question, Russell, we call them groups arriving out of the American War, where they call them groups. Because there were some Oriental people in our audience, and it was deemed to be demeaning. So
back to the political correctness, right?
Yeah.
Well, and sort of on that note. The headlines in Canada this week were that the Canadian Army has to get rid of all their gender. All terms have to be now gender neutral.
Yes.
So who knows where that's leading? But yeah.
Also, I'll tell you what you can do if you email me your address when we finish here, I'll send you a book.
Yeah. Okay. Love that. And you know what? I'll send you one of our books too.
Yeah, let's swap.
Yeah,
I will exchange addresses, and because you can't get that book anywhere, I'm the only guy that's got those books.
Okay, well, hey, I will look forward to receiving that. Do you have a few more minutes, or?
I've got a couple more minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so another thing I was hoping to get into was the difference between ZANLA and FRELIMO. So these were two terrorist groups that you guys were fighting. Were they allied together or in coordinating, or was one of them like funded by the Chinese and the other the Soviets? How did that work?
Okay, so Rhodesia is pretty much split down the middle with two tribes. You have the tribe in the northern part of Rhodesia called the Shona tribe, and you have a tribe in the southern part of Rhodesia called the Matabele. And the Matabele tribe, and pretty much you could say the border was right through the middle. And the Matabele tribe, who lived in the south of Rhodesia, were an offshoot of the Zulu tribe who lived in South Africa. Very warlike tribe. They were not. They didn't sit around and cultivate the land and raise cattle. They were just warlike. They would raid other tribes. So you had the Matabele in the south, and you had the Shona in the north. And the whole insurgency in Rhodesia started off, funny enough, with the Shona, because they are actually traditionally a peace-loving tribe. They just raise their cattle and grow their corn, and that's it. But they started the insurgency, and they were backed by China. They were armed and they were recruited and supported by China. Then the Matabele, they joined the insurgency, but not amalgamating with the Shona. So you had two specific groups, and the Matabele were supported by the Russians. So, and they hated each other, and they would clash. I mean, we would come across horrific battle scenes where the Matabele had been fighting the Shona, and the place was strewn with dead people. They hated each other.
Yeah, really.
That was something that we could play on.
I bet.
We played on that. The FRELIMO that you mentioned earlier were the Mozambique resistance people. The FRELIMO were on the Mozambique side.
Right.
So, and you know what? The other big thing, Russell, about the difference between Rhodesian soldiers and, say, Canadian soldier, an American soldier, British soldier, is we were fighting to save our country. We were fighting in our country to save our country. And that's completely different to a Canadian soldier going over to Afghanistan. The whole dynamics are different. He's there doing something for someone else, and he's seldom appreciated for doing that by the people that he's going to.
Yeah, well, and I was thinking about that too when reading the book, is that the Rhodesian soldier was, this was like an existential battle, because if you lose, then you're going to lose your country. And what does that mean? Well, I assume it means you're going to lose your home and possibly like your family members. Like this is like a war where the stakes are just incredibly high. And
yes. Yeah.
That must have been the reason why Rhodesia was able to fight for what was it, like 10, 12, 15 years?
Well, yes, it was. And when you're fighting to save yourself and your country and your family and your home and everything, defeat is not an option. You're not worried about the politics of what you do. You're not worried about fighting evil with evil and dressing up as a devil to fight the devil.
Right.
And we didn't care what we did. We just had one thought in mind. That's what we had to win the war. And we had very few friends, but we did what we had to do, and we weren't hindered by an unfriendly press or by public opinion or anything like that, because the public opinion was against us anyway. There's nothing we could have done that could have changed that. So we just really did what we had to do, and some of the things that we had to do couldn't be done today. But if Canada was invaded, that would be a whole different story.
Yeah, that
would be a whole different story where the Geneva Convention, they can go out the window. We need to save our country out.
Well, that's fascinating. Are you able to give an example of what you mean by that, when there's just something that would not be able to be done today?
Just the whole Selous Scout thing was very, very difficult. No, there's some things that we just don't want to go back on, but we were not held back in any way. We had to do something, we'd go and do it.
Yeah. There's I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but the mission, I guess at some point you guys must have realized that the war was not going to end in a favorable outcome for you guys, and near the end there's a mission where you and I think it's I forget who's involved in it, but it's you and I think a former terrorist who you turned, and you're actually got a mission to kill Mugabe, who of course is the tyrant who took over that country. If you would have been able to pull that off, like would Rhodesia or Zimbabwe would have gone down like a different path without Mugabe, or would somebody of his ilk taken over from him?
Yeah, it would have changed. It would have changed the trajectory of history a little bit, but it wouldn't have altered the ultimate result, because you take Mugabe out of the equation. It's just like today in Zimbabwe. Mugabe was taken out of the equation. Everyone thought that when he was taken out of the equation, Zimbabwe would get out of the doldrums and recover economically and sort of shake off the dust of the past. Didn't. It's as bad as it ever was, because whoever took over from Mugabe, the guy Mnangagwa, he was as bad as Mugabe. So it wouldn't have changed. It wouldn't have changed the mindset at all. No.
Yeah, that's sort of goes back to that like inevitable outcome.
Anyway, Russell, look, you send me your brother's book. Yeah. I'd really like to read it, and I will send you a copy of Who Teach the Wisdom. It's
I can't wait to read it, Tim. Hey, thanks a lot for spending some time with me today, and I can't wait to read the next book.
Okay, we'll stay in touch, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
And that concludes my interview with Tim Bax. If you want to learn more about the Rhodesian Bush War, then I highly recommend you get a copy of his book, 3 Sips of Gin. It's truly A fantastic read. And if you like this episode, then please take a minute to like and share on your social media, or better yet, you can go old school and tell a friend directly about it. Hey, you can also help me out by leaving a review on Apple iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also check out more about my interview with Tim Bax by going to my website, www.onesoldierpodcast.com. That's it for today. Out.